In the hangar, there are two religions. You are either a Lycoming pilot or you are a Continental pilot. The gray engine versus the gold engine. The Ford versus the Chevy of the sky. For 70 years, these two American titans have powered 90% of the world's general aviation fleet. They look the same, they sound the same, they both drink 100 low-lead fuel, but one of them has a fatal flaw. One of these engines has a glass jaw, a camshaft design so poor that if you don't fly it every week, it eats itself alive. The other is notorious for burning valves, leaking oil, and demanding a top overhaul before it ever reaches half-time. Today, we are tearing them down to the crank. We are going to expose the cam spalling crisis of the Lycoming and the valve guide nightmare of the Continental. This is Lycoming versus Continental. Which engine is actually bulletproof? Forget the brochure time between overhauls. Let's ask the mechanic who has to fix them. Which heart do you trust to bring you home? Walk into any hangar in America and you will see the split. Piper Cherokee guys, they are Lycoming through and through. Cessna. 172 pilots, same story. Unless you are flying a 182, then you are in the Continental camp. Bonanza and Baron owners? They would not touch a Lycoming if you paid them. This is not just about engines, it is about tribes. You inherit your loyalties from the airframe, not the brochure. That is how it has been since the 1950s, when airframe makers picked their partners and locked the rest of us into this family feud. Lycoming, out of Williamsport, Pennsylvania, put their stamp on most of the trainers and light singles. Continental, born in Detroit and now down in Alabama, landed the big six-cylinder jobs, Bonanzas, Barons, and the Cessna 182. These choices were not made in a boardroom. They were hammered out on the ramp, in the shop, over parts bins and warranty claims. Today, nearly 90% of the certified piston fleet runs one or the other. It is not just about numbers, it is about what kind of mechanic you call at 2 a.m., what kind of oil stains are on your hangar floor, and whether you keep a drip pan under your engine or a magnet in your oil filter. This is how the tribes were drawn and why the debate never dies. Every argument in the shop comes down to one thing, where they put the camshaft. Lycoming sets theirs right up top, riding the backbone of the case. Continental buries it deep in the sump, down in the oil. That is the fork in the road. Lycoming's cam sits above the crank, relying on oil flung up by the spinning crankshaft, splash lubrication, nothing fancy. When you shut down, gravity wins. Oil drains back to the sump, and the cam is left high and dry, just waiting for moisture to creep in. Let that engine sit 2 weeks in a cold hangar, and you are rolling the dice on rust. Next start, that cam grinds its own lobes to dust. That is where the spalling starts. Continental, though, keeps its cam low, soaking in a bath of oil after shutdown. No matter how long it sits, there is always a film on the lobes. That oil bath buys you time. It is why old Continentals can survive months between flights without turning into a glitter factory. The split is not just a blueprint quirk, it is the root of every failure I see when I crack a case. Top cam, bottom cam, splash or bath. That is the line in the sand between the corn sheller and the oil leaker. Crack open a Lycoming after it has sat for a month and you will see the truth written in rust. The camshaft sits right at the top of the case, out in the breeze, relying on splash oil from the crank flinging it up when the engine is running. Shut down, and gravity pulls every drop back to the sump. Within 48 hours, that cam is dry as a bone. Give it a week or two in a cold, damp hangar, and moisture starts working on the lobes. You can almost hear the corrosion creeping in. The next time you crank it over those lifters, grind that rust right into the hardened surface. That is when the spalling starts. Tiny flakes of metal shearing off, mixing into the oil. You will not see it until you cut open the filter and find it sparkling back at you. That is not gold. That is your camshaft turning into shop glitter. Lycoming calls it splash lubrication, but it is more like hope and prayers. The cam is the highest point in the engine, and it is the first thing to go dry. Continental, on the other hand, buries the cam down low, soaking in an oil bath. You can walk away from a Continental for a month, come back, and the cam still has a film of oil clinging to it. That is why the old-timers say Continentals survive sitting better. Lycomings, they want to be flown, not parked. I have seen enough ruined cams to know the pattern. It starts with a little surface pitting, just a few rust spots. Ignore it, and the next startup grinds those pits deeper, right through the nitrided layer into soft steel. Now you are making metal with every revolution. Run it long enough, and you will be staring at a $20,000 case split, all because you thought a hangared airplane was safe from harm. Moisture does not care about paint or polish. It finds the highest, driest piece of steel and eats it alive. That is the physics behind failure. Do not blame bad luck. Blame time, gravity, and a cam that is left high and dry. Here is what a 2-week vacation can cost you if you own a Cherokee with a Lycoming up front. Owner calls in, says the engine sounds rough, oil filters got a little sparkle, pull the cowl, and the story's written in steel. Cam lobes pitted, lifters chewed, a fine metallic dust coating the sump. Every mechanic knows this bill before the case is even split. You are looking at a full teardown, 120 hours of shop labor, every bolt, every bearing, every seal replaced. New cam, new lifters, and a stack of parts that reads like a grocery list for disaster. The invoice is about $25,000, give or take. That is not a rare horror story. That is what happens when a Lycoming sits for 2 weeks in a damp hangar and you trust hope over physics. The pattern is always the same. The engine gets flown once a month, maybe less. Owner thinks a hangar protects it. Meanwhile, moisture sneaks in, settles on the cam, and the oil drains away. That first cold start after a long sit is a death sentence for the hardened surface. Spalling kicks off, flakes start circulating, and pretty soon you are making metal by the handful. There is no shortcut out of this mess. Lycoming cams cannot be swapped without splitting the case. That is why the shop rate jumps. Every hour spent digging down to the cam is money you will never see again. Want to avoid this? Here is the checklist. Fly your Lycoming at least every 10 days. Change the oil 4 times a year minimum, and do not trust your eyes. Cut open the filter and look for glitter. If you are parking for more than 2 weeks, pickle the engine or use a preservative oil. Do not believe in luck. Believe in chemistry and gravity. The next time you are tempted to let the plane sit, remember the $25,000 lesson in deferred maintenance. Owners who fly often do not pay these bills. The ones who do not keep me in business. Inside a Lycoming, the camshaft sits high and dry, exposed to the air, and always the first suspect when mechanics talk about engine failure. Yet it is rarely the cam that ends an engine's life. The real story is in the cylinders. Lycoming's nitrided barrels are so hard they shrug off wear, holding compression long after the first overhaul. Even at 2,000 hours, crosshatch marks linger, and compression numbers stay strong, unless the engine is abused or left idle for months. That is why Lycomings have a reputation for running rough but lasting long, with most failures traced back to cam spalling, not cylinder wear. Continental takes a different approach. The camshaft is buried deep in oil, protected from corrosion, but the cylinders tell a tougher tale. Softer steel and looser valve guides mean the exhaust valves run hotter, and over time those guides start to wobble. Side play grows, valves burn, and compression drops. A healthy cylinder should hold 80 pounds per square inch on a compression test. Continental owners start to worry at 60, but the number that matters is 38/80. When a cylinder reads 38/80, it is finished. That is the moment the jug comes off and the top overhaul begins. Bore scopes reveal burnt seats and torched valves, a familiar sight by 800 to 1,200 hours. Top overhauls on Continentals are routine, costing $16,000 to $20,000 for cylinders and valves, far less than a full teardown, but still a regular expense. The trade-off for Continental's smoothness is more frequent top-end work. Lycoming cylinders, noisy but stubborn, rarely quit first. Continentals run quietly until a valve fails and the compression gauge shows 38/80. That is the wear pattern. Lycomings die of cam disease, Continentals of valve cancer. Compression testing is not just tradition, it is the only warning. Under 60/80 is a concern. 38/80 is the end. Metallurgy and maintenance decide who gets to fly another day. If you want to know what it's really like to own a Continental, don't bother looking at the tatch. Look at the flaw under the engine. Drip pans aren't optional, they're as much a part of the airplane as the yoke. I've yet to meet a Continental that isn't marked its territory with a slick little puddle under the pushrod tubes or a streak down the firewall from a rocker cover. Some folks call it a nuisance, others call it a design feature. The joke in the shop is, if your Continental isn't leaking, it's out of oil. Most of these leaks come from the same spots: pushrod tube seals that harden up and start weeping, accessory case gaskets that never quite seal, and rocker cover gaskets that seem to sweat oil the minute you torque them down. The worst offenders are the big 6-cylinder jobs, the IO-520s and IO-550s that power Bonanzas and Barons. More cylinders, more gaskets, more places for oil to find daylight. You can chase leaks all you want, but you'll spend more time cleaning the belly than fixing the engine. Every annual, it's the same ritual: degrease, retorque, replace a gasket or two, and hope for the best. By the next oil change, the leak is back, and so is the drip pan. Owners get used to it. Some even brag about how little their engine leaks, just a dime-sized spot after a week. Others carry a case of oil in the baggage compartment and top off every few flights. The real risk isn't the mess, it's missing a new leak that actually matters, like a cracked case or a split oil line. That's why you can't ignore the drips. Wipe the belly, check the oil, and keep an eye on your consumption. And if you're running lean of peak, watch those exhaust valves. Continental guides don't like it hot, and burnt valves are just another bill waiting in the wings. In the end, you learn to live with the leaks, or you switch to Lycoming and trade oil stains for vibration. That's the deal. You can talk metallurgy and time between overhauls all day, but you do not feel that on the ramp. What you feel is the engine shaking the yoke in your hand or humming smooth as silk through the rudder pedals. Lycoming's got that old tractor vibe for a reason. 4 big jugs, a crank built like a railroad tie, and a firing order that makes the whole airplane buzz. Every mechanic knows the sound: panels rattling, throttle cables humming, the unmistakable clatter of a corn sheller doing its job. That vibration works its way through the airframe, right into the accessories bolted to the back of the case. Alternators, magnetos, vacuum pumps. On a Lycoming, they are all along for the ride, and they take a beating. But here is the thing: the bottom end on a Lycoming is so overbuilt, it shrugs off the abuse. Crankshafts and rods rarely fail unless somebody forgets to torque a bolt or runs it out of oil. The real cost comes from the cam up top, not the gear train out back. Continental goes the other way. 6 cylinders, perfectly balanced, firing in a rhythm that feels more Mercedes than Massey Ferguson. That is why Bonanza and Baron owners call it the gentleman's engine. You barely feel it running, and the accessories seem to last forever until they do not. Continental's smoothness comes with a price. The accessory case, especially on the big IO-520s and IO-550s, takes all the torque and twisting loads from the crank, and that stress finds the weak link. Starter adapters slip, alternator gears shear teeth, and when they let go, you are not just out an alternator, you are grounded. I have seen a gear failure turn into a $3,800 bill and a 2-week wait for parts, all because a drive gear let go at the wrong RPM. FAA service. Difficulty reports are full of these accessory failures on big Continentals, and everyone means downtime and a new line on the invoice. You want to know the real difference? Lycoming vibrates, Continental leaks. Lycoming shakes its accessories to death, but the core survives. Continental runs like a watch, but when the gear train lets go, it is not just a drip pan you are reaching for, it is your checkbook. Every owner learns this the hard way. You do not just pick an engine for the name on the case. You pick it for the way it feels at 2,400 RPM and for the bills it sends when things go sideways. Here's how it shakes out when you stop arguing brands and start looking at how these engines live and die in the field. It's not about what's stamped on the data plate, it's about how you use the airplane. If you are running a flight school, flying 5, 6, even 8 hours a day, week in and week out, you want a Lycoming up front. The corn sheller loves a schedule. That camshaft, as much as it wants to rust when you park it, never gets the chance if you are turning it every morning. The splash oil keeps the lobes slick, the nitrided cylinders shrug off abuse, and you can rack up 2,000 hours without ever splitting the case. I have seen 172 fleets run O-320 engines to TBO and beyond, no metal in the filter, just the usual shake and rattle. High utilization is the magic bullet. Fly it hard and the cam never complains. Now flip the script. You are a private owner, maybe flying 5 hours a month if you are lucky. The plane sits in the hangar, collects dust, and the Lycoming cam sits up top, drying out, waiting for moisture to sneak in. That is when the trouble starts. The next cold start grinds rust into the lobes, and you are on the hook for $25,000 for a teardown. For the low utilization crowd, Continental is the safer bet. The oil leaker's cam lives in an oil bath, so you can let it sit for weeks without losing sleep. Sure, you will be chasing oil stains, and by 1,000 hours you will be shopping for new cylinders, but at least you are not gambling on a dry cam every time you hit the starter. This is the owner's matrix, plain and simple. If your airplane flies more than 5 hours a day, Lycoming is bulletproof. If it flies less than 5 hours a month, Continental survives the neglect. That is not marketing. That is what the logbooks say. The fleet numbers back it up. Lycomings with high time live long, Continentals with low time do not spoil cams. If you want bulletproof, match the engine to your mission, not your tribe. And remember, at the end of the day, both engines will let you down if you let them sit and rot. The only real bulletproof engine is the one that gets flown, gets its oil changed, and gets its filter cut open every time. That is the mechanic's truth. The truth is, neither engine's bulletproof, just differently flawed. Lycoming's cam sits up top, rusting if you let it loaf. Continental leaks, eats guides, wants a mid-time top, but runs smooth when the valves seal. Blame design, not luck. Don't baby it, don't neglect it. Change your oil, fly your plane, pray for your camshaft. Now cut your filter, find some glitter. Tell me, are you team corn sheller or team bedwetter?